Welcome to the Working Genius podcast, where we discuss anything and everything related to the 6 types of working genius and how it impacts your work and your life. I'm Pat Lencioni, your host, joined by Tracy, Bo, and Cody. And I know you guys are great today. We're not going to ask because we don't need to do that. But unless do you have anything to share, anybody? Anybody having any feelings today that you want to share with the audience? No?
Maybe instead of you asking us how we are, you should just tell us that we're great every time. That would be a great way to start.
There you go. You guys are great. You have no problems. You're so lucky. We are all blessed, aren't we? Even on tough days. We've got Karen here and Matt producing. So, Cody, what's the topic today?
Well, I'm flying kind of blind here. Matt, you have one job. Put the topic in the chat here, but I think it's too much of a good thing. I'm going to go ahead and remember it from the notes.
All right. Yeah, we can see it on our screens, but all right.
Matt's doing less great as this conversation progresses.
Yeah, how are you doing, Matt? Although can you guys not see it on your screens?
I can see it.
Can't see it.
Oh, no, we can't.
Okay. Little technical issue. Okay, got it. Okay, there it goes twice. All right. Matt's off the hook there. So, too much of a good thing. Now, we teased this episode at the end of last year. We wanted to talk today about why it's actually not good to spend all of your time doing just the working geniuses. And I know this is like an interesting thing, because what we spend our time doing here is say, hey, let's everybody use our geniuses as much as we can. And in a perfect world, we think that's what we would do. And nobody has that perfect world. But if we aspire to that can be a problem too, because in reality, people who get to do what they want to do all the time are almost always unhappy ultimately. And we want to talk about that, about why it is actually good for us to spend some time in our competencies and even in our frustrations. Cody.
Well, Pat, I was pretty silent during the pre-production meeting where you teased this idea out. And then the only thing I said to you was, I'm going to do a little something different on this episode. And I'd actually like to take the opposite approach here. I'd like to argue with you guys live, the 3 of you, why I think maybe this isn't that's not the right thing. So I don't know if there's too much of a good thing when it comes to working genius. Are you open to having a live debate on whether that perspective, or let's go full throttle, full in your genius?
Oh, no. We always want to be able to have a debate. Let me explain what I'm thinking about this. And gosh, if I'm wrong, then that will be great to help people understand that. But here's the thing. When I think about people that are what we would call trust fund babies, there's a great movie called About a Boy with Hugh Grant, and his dad writes a song, a Christmas carol or a Christmas song, and it makes so much money every year that this guy gets all this money coming in. His dad's passed away, and now he's independently wealthy, but he's miserable because he doesn't have to do anything. So he's just at home and he works. I mean, he doesn't work. He just kind of has fun, and everybody thinks that would be great. But in fact, it's in doing things that we have to do sometimes that we learn to appreciate the things we like to do most. Just like if you got to eat dessert every day, over time you would not like dessert. You gotta mix in things that you don't like to do in order to appreciate both the ability to have things and to appreciate other people who are good at things that you're not. Now, I'm not. That's why when somebody asks us, what's the ideal breakdown of how much time you spend in your geniuses, it's not 100 genius, 0 competency, 0 frustration. I actually think there's a minimum time that you should have to spend in your frustration and in your competency in order to continually appreciate what you do and appreciate others who do that. So that's my argument. Does that make sense, Cody?
Yeah, the trust fund argument's a good one. And I think what I would say is, as it relates to going to work or the majority of your day, if you're trying to maximize the amount of time you spend in your genius, life, I guess it's a little more practical. Like, life won't let you spend 100% of your time in your genius. Even if all day at work, I got to be a discerner galvanizer, which I love and I get tons of energy from. When I go home, it's make the food help my wife with the dishes or help my wife with dinner, clean up and put the kids to bed. Like, I'm still working in the enablement tenacity phase, no matter what I do at work. And so I think so many people, I think the perspective for me is there's so many people, like we talk about on this podcast, who don't get to spend enough time in their genius, that if we tried to max that out, they would never get to 100%, even if they tried.
Okay, so this is great. What I wanted to say though is, so you're exactly right. Aside from some people, I mean, and it's worth noting that there are people who don't do almost anything outside of their genius because they have assistants to do it, and they have other people, like there's rock stars and professional athletes, and I suppose like some really, really, really rich people who have eliminated the need to do anything outside of their that they don't feel like doing. Okay, that's not generally our audience. And you're right, life doesn't let us do that, but there's a difference between going into it and being thankful for those moments when we're not working in our genius. And kind of complaining about those. In other words, we should actually say, hey, I have to change diapers, or I have to rake leaves, or I have to do the bills, and this isn't my thing. Now, for some people, that is their thing. I have to come up with a new idea for vacation this year. And sometimes when we're outside of our genius, rather than say, crap, I can't believe I have to do this, we need to say, thank God I'm doing this because it gives me a greater appreciation that I wouldn't otherwise have. And I wouldn't be able to appreciate other people's geniuses if I didn't experience a little bit of the frustration of working in those areas.
So I think a really good argument for this, for me, is the curb against entitlement. That every leader would have a willingness to be able to do whatever is necessary, a willingness to clean the toilets, a willingness to restock the paper in the printer. And as even the last couple of minutes describing this, I've realized, we're giving a lot of enablement and tenacity examples. And I would love to say, what does that look like in the inverse? If your frustrations are wonder and invention, what about those? Because Cody and Pat and I are frustrated by enablement tenacity. Of course, we're going to go home and those types of tasks are going to be part of our day-to-day life. What does it look like for somebody who's an ET or a DT who's frustrated by wonder and invention to say, you should still have a little bit of that in your life?
Well, when I think about this, I think everybody should sit alone sometimes and ponder. Though we're not meant to live our lives without doing that, right? And none of us. So I think we are meant to actually experience life again with all six geniuses. And I know it's a really good question, Bo, because I think about somebody who hates inventing. And I think, but every once in a while they should exercise that muscle. One of the things that happens if we don't exercise those muscles and we atrophy is that we can develop a sense of fear in life. Like let's just say, like I remember hearing some president of the United States, I think it was George Bush, the first one, who talked about, I haven't been to a grocery store in 30 years, and it's like he just hadn't scanned something at the grocery store. He didn't even relate to the world anymore. And we're not meant to fear things and go, I think I'm incapable of balancing a checkbook. I think I'm incapable of coming up with a new idea. I think I'm incapable of sitting in a room when the power goes off and just pondering things and looking out the window. So I think when we don't do anything outside of our genius, we can actually develop a fear of those things. And I don't think that's a virtuous thing. I don't think that's a great thing.
I think that we could develop a fear of those things. And I know that if you only ever do things that you're good at, that isn't necessarily the path to humility. And stepping in to do something where you're a beginner is a good practice for all of us to be regularly doing to keep ourselves humble, to keep ourselves curious and learning, and to your point at the beginning of this episode, to appreciate better the people who do it naturally. When I try to enable somebody and I realize just how bad I am at it, I am more grateful for the Tracys and Karens and Ashleys in my life who do it so wonderfully and intuitively.
Yeah, I agree. Cody, you wanted to say something.
Pretty good argument to then put me in the position of saying, well, you're not humble if that's all you want to do. So I'm moving the other way on your guys' side of the argument. But I'm totally hearing what you're saying. Like I don't want it to sound like, hey, you should avoid hard things. If inventing is hard for you, you should avoid it. I totally agree with you, Pat. I think that when it goes from being hard to I'm going to abdicate any responsibility for doing that thing because it's not my gift, right, that's a problem. And then it becomes sort of a crippling fear of like, boy, I don't think I could invent or I could be by myself to be creative. That's problematic. And I do have some empathy for. Like I would just say this week I had a couple opportunities to be purely a discerner galvanizer on a few calls. And I came home just fired up, like filled with energy and joy. And I thought, man, even though we understand this and we are organizing our work and our life in a way that we want to maximize our time and our genius, I still spend so much time outside of my genius. Like I got some feedback about how I showed up to a meeting, and in essence, you could say the feedback was, "Hey, Cody, I know you're not good at enablement. That showed a lot in this meeting. Can you please dial that back a little bit?" And you're right. I absolutely should show up, and even though that might be harder for me, but I feel like the point I'm trying to make is there's so many people who aren't in danger of spending all their day in their genius. In fact, they only get to taste it a little bit. That if we maxed out on that, they'd only ever get to 85%.
Yes. And so I totally get where you're coming from on that. One of the things I will say is I get older, I have more, and my kids are going to, my last son is getting ready to go to college. It is easier now for me to actually pick and choose the things I work on. And I actually need to be better at choosing to do some things that I don't love. And because when I do them, there's something really good in that. And part of that's a little bit of self-sacrifice. But for most people listening to this, they're like, that would be a very high-class problem. So if you're not doing near enough in your genius, go for it. Keep going. Focus on that. But don't think that success will be the day you stop having to do things outside of your genius. And I heard somebody use the term yesterday, the importance of monotasking, of like just doing one thing at a time. And I'm going to ask Matt, because Matt, you had a good thought about this, about doing the dishes, which is not in your genius and not in my genius, but you learned something in your life recently. Tell us about your thought about that.
Yeah, it's like a mindfulness thing. It's just doing one thing at a time, being present with whatever task you're doing. So if you're doing a task that you don't actually like to do, it's actually beneficial and it makes you enjoy it more if all you do for that time is just that task. And so you're not trying to, like you said, my example was the dishes. I didn't like doing the dishes. I didn't like how there was little bits of food on it. And so it was like the thing the task that I dreaded. But when I started saying, okay, for the next 15 minutes, I'm just going to do this task. I'm going to jump into it. And I'm not going to think about other things. I'm not going to think about all the other things I would rather be doing. I'm just going to think about getting this task done. And that's kind of the same thing as how we describe like backing into your geniuses, like the T cave, or just committing to working your frustrations is like, okay, if I can just do this one task for the next however long, then I can actually do it likely better than I would if I was thinking about the other things I'd rather be doing, probably quicker as well. And then over time, I've actually enjoyed getting the dishes done because it's become kind of a part of my routine. It's become natural for me.
Which is not to say go out and get a job, eat a dishwasher.
Yeah.
And there are people in the world who do that, like, hey, this isn't that bad. Maybe I should do it every day, all the time. And it's like, no. But there's something about leaning into those moments when you have to do that. It makes it less painful and it gives you a different perspective.
And I will say, Pat, the point that many of you made that I totally am aligned with is it does make you appreciate the work that's done in that genius that maybe you underappreciate. Like the idea of working in your frustration. I oftentimes, when I come out of working in my frustration, I'm compelled to go to the person that has that genius and say, I'm so thankful and grateful that you have that, because I just spent an hour doing it. And I'm glad there are people like you in the world who get joy and energy from that. So I totally agree that there's the sentiment around appreciation is one of the reasons to work outside of your genius.
The inverse is sometimes true as well. If I know that somebody is not an inventor and they took the work to write a first draft of something, it kind of means more to me than if a fellow inventor wrote a first draft, because like I know how much work that took for you. And so knowing each other's geniuses can help us appreciate when people are working in their frustrations for the betterment of the team, for advancing our mission.
And it's interesting when I accomplish something that's either in my frustration or my competency, I know that I have this sense of accomplishment. I'm proud of myself. I have this level of confidence that I didn't have going into it. And I think that's needed. I know when I do stuff in my working genius, I don't have that same sentiment, because it comes so naturally to me, I would say. So, and I think that's good for us.
That's
yeah,
great.
it becomes even more of a gift to others.
Yes.
And a sense to ourselves of, yeah, okay, I can do that. But I'm going to say something, Cody. We would not have thought about all these things had you not taken that position. Because we didn't come in. We have a few notes here, but most of the stuff we're talking about weren't on our notes. So we're exploring this together because you said, well, let me say maybe this isn't the right thing. So I want to just say I think you were wrong, and you did the right thing by putting that out there.
Do I have to say that on recording that I was wrong? No,
because you were wrong in the sense this: we do not want people out there who are not spending enough time in their genius to back off from that. So I'm glad you made that clear, because that is not the point. The point is, in those moments when you occasionally do have to spend time outside of that, be grateful for that and realize good things come from that too. I used to always say CEOs should do manual labor for 1 day a month. But what I realized, what I was saying is, oh, I'm an ID. I don't like to do, but man, when I do have to do something like that, when I go to that event and somebody says, we have to pick up the chairs and put them away after the meeting, and then I go and do it well, I'm like, I'm really glad I did that. Even though if I had to do that every day, I'd probably be frustrated. So I think there's goodness that comes from that. I think God makes us to enjoy joy and sadness. He makes us to enjoy things we love to do and sometimes the things we're not loving to do. And so that's the point of our little podcast here. All right? Very
Sounds good.
All righty. Well, thanks for joining us. Cody, thank you for taking that position. You weren't wrong, but you were partially wrong. And
Just
that's
not
good.
humble.
You definitely weren't in doubt. I can tell you that.
Rarely wrong, never in doubt. That's true.
All righty, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We'd love to talk to you about Working Genius. It continues to grow. We're getting so much great feedback about people. Yesterday, I saw a quote that said, a person said, this has changed the way I look at every single relationship in my life. And I thought about that. I said, yep, it has for me too. Just understanding what people are and what gives them joy, and being able to communicate. So we love doing this with you. We appreciate you listening, and we will talk to you next time on the Working Genius podcast. God bless.